Welcome back to Handpicked Stories from the Field. This season, we're showcasing episodes produced by the Voicing Change Project, a collaborative effort to share transformative food system knowledge between Canada, Kenya, and Brazil. Charlie is going to introduce this episode for us.
Welcome back to the Voicing Change podcast. In our pilot episode, we shared the story of how the Voicing Change project was born in a forest, when Lloyd Chico, chief of the Kagitu First Nation in northern Canada, visited a faxinal in southern Brazil. And a faxinal is a kind of commonly owned space where traditional food crops are produced alongside the management of ancient forest ecologies. Forests are really special to the Voicing Change team. And today is the first of a two-part episode where our guests are going to tell us about relationships between forests, food and people in different places. Voicing Change team member Eve Nimmo interviews 3 forest researchers in southern Brazil, Migori County in Kenya, and in northern Canada. Before we hear their introductions, we just want to introduce a key concept that will be useful in understanding some of the conversation that follows. And that concept is agroforestry, which is the intentional integration of trees and shrubs into crop and livestock farming systems. Agroforestry is being touted as a climate solution around the world, but it does have a complicated history. So while indigenous hunter-gatherers, pastoralists and peasant farmers have procured and produced food in forests for millennia, agroforestry has also been used as a tool of colonial management, such as the shamba system that was used in Kenya by British colonists as a way to produce wood fuel to power their imperial infrastructure. In this episode, then, our guests describe the unique forest ecologies in their different regions, and they go on to explore some of the tensions and contradictions in the ways that forests have and continue to be managed. Let's hear from our first guest.
Pegodita Godiriwi.
Ma en lando para manhã jopus.
Este é mudança de voz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Baltzer. I'm a professor in biology at Wilfrid Laurier University and a Canada Research Chair in Forests and Global Change. I'm a forest ecologist, and my research is focused on climate change impacts on forests, and I've worked in various systems, including tropical forests, but my program now is really focused on subarctic forests and impacts of climate warming, direct impacts of climate warming, and then the indirect impacts of wildfire and permafrost thaw on these northern forests.
Thank you. Zach Ngalo, Utieno Ayayo. Associate Professor of Biological Sciences. I do research mainly on, my initial research was on biopesticides, which are applied in various areas in crop protection, in forest protection, and we can also apply them in public health. I worked on a bacterium that is used for controlling pests and vectors of disease. My current research, in addition to that, is on apiculture. Most of the flowering plants depend on honeybees for pollination, and that helps us also in conservation. So we make sure that in this small hill and this small forest, we conserve as much as possible to have the indigenous plants, but also we add some exotic or ornamentals and whatever crops that the bees will forage on. So that's basically what I'm doing.
Thank you very much, Zach. Então, I'm mixing Portuguese with English. So, André, can you please give us a brief introduction?
My name is André Lacerda. I work with the Brazilian Agriculture Research Corporation, which is a federal agency that focuses research on all types of agriculture in general. I'm working currently in southern Brazil in all aspects of forest management, but mainly community-based research in which we try to develop solutions for forest management and silvicultural practice, considering our very restrictive law environment.
So today with us, we have 3 researchers who work in very different kinds of forests, on forest systems and with communities. And so I think it's helpful for the audience if each of you could describe a little bit about the forest, where you work. So Jen, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the forest biome in the Northwest Territories?
So it's a fairly open canopy system that is dominated by needle-leaved conifers. It's a cold climate, so winter dominates the year. Much of the forest in this system is underlain by permafrost, and this is perennially frozen ground. So the top layer of the soil thaws out annually, but there's frozen soil beneath that. And so the soils are cold, decomposition is slow, and a lot of carbon builds up in the soil in the form of peat. About 80 to 90% of the carbon in the system is in the soil as opposed to in the trees, as it would be in the systems that Andre and Zach are working in. The system's dominated by, in terms of disturbance, dominated by wildfire. And this is a really important component of the forest cycle. So fire moves through and helps to open up the canopy, helps to renew the forest, and creates a mosaic of stand ages and helps to support biodiversity in the system.
Andre, can you give us a brief description of the forest that you work in?
The forest that we've been working here in Brazil is what we call a subtropical umbrophilous forest. So it's not the typical Brazilian image of a tropical forest or rainforest in the Amazon. Here in southern Brazil, we have colder winters. So that's why it's subtropical, and umbrophilous means that it's quite wet. So we originally called this forest here as Araucaria forest because of its main species, the Araucaria angustifolia. Basically, this kind of forest can be found in the mountains and plateaus in the southern of Brazil, in altitudes of more than 700 meters above the sea level, sometimes reaching 1,000 meters or even higher. We have precipitation levels reaching up to 3,000 millimeters a year without obvious drought seasons. It's interesting to understand as well that since colonization in the 19th century, we used to have a forest that was basically continuous throughout the region. And since then, we have mostly fragments of this forest. We used to have more than 200,000 square kilometers of forest, and now what we see as a primary forest is less than 1%. However, nowadays, because of environmental laws that we were going to discuss after, we have up to 25% of younger secondary forests in the region.
Thank you, Andre. And now I'll pass it over to you, Zach, if you could describe a little bit about the forest in Kenya where you work.
Our little forest is it's indigenous forest, but due to agricultural activities, as I had said earlier, we have a bit of exotic trees being planted around. Because of the land tenure system, you find that if it falls on somebody else's land, then they can do whatever they feel like if they don't value the conservation aspect of it. So you'll find that in addition to the indigenous trees that we have, we also have some exotic trees like eucalyptus being planted for commercial purposes.
Okay, thank you. So I think it's important for our work that we're doing with the Voicing Change, but also in each of these places, to think about how the forests and the community interact, right? And so it'd be great if you all could tell us a little bit about why the forest environment is important to the communities that you work with. And so Jen, we'll start with you.
Okay, so in the Northwest Territories, the forests are really, central to people's livelihoods. People spend a lot of time on the land in the forest for a variety of activities, from recreational to livelihood activities to cultural activities. The indigenous communities in the Northwest Territories rely very heavily on the forests in the Northwest Territories for various subsistence food resources, both harvested wildlife as well as fruits and berries harvested from the land and various medicinal plants. So there's a lot of kind of subsistence livelihood that is associated with the forests in the Northwest Territories.
I wanted to add that one of the most important aspects in this forest is medicinal plants. Quite a while ago, before the invasion of the forest, a lot of people would get medicinal plants from this forest, and they would use them. Some of them would use them, and they have their medical problems solved before they think of going to the hospital. There are many herbs that are used from the forest, and they use them for natural remedies for treating various ailments. So I think this is one of the important things apart from the activities of beekeeping. And then you find that sometimes people just come to have a quiet time on the forest for medication on the top of the hill.
Thanks, Zach. That's really interesting, that people still see the forest as a space where they can recuperate. Andre, can you tell us a little bit about how people here in southern Brazil use the forest?
Yes, here in southern Brazil, the forests are used for many purposes. Apart from the most common and obvious uses such as for firewood, we have about 300 tree species. Apart from another hundreds of shrubs and herbs. So we have a great variety of species that people consume directly as food sources, but also as medicinal. But people have been using these forest resources for the longest time. It's interesting that even the Araucaria forest, as we call here the regional forest, the Araucaria tree itself produces a nut-like fruit that is a food staple in the region, and it's also essential for wildlife during the fall and winter seasons. But we also have many other plants that produce fruits, especially from the botanical family Myrtaceae. We have a few dozens of those species that are very appreciated for human consumption, and of course they are very important for wildlife. Something very important as well in the region is another species called Ilex paraguariensis, which is basically the scientific name of what we call regionally here erva mate or yerba mate in Spanish, which is a tree that has been harvested and consumed by indigenous communities and adopted by the colonizers here in 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and currently very widespread use in the region. So the leaves of these trees are harvested, dried, and grinded and consumed in an infusion for hot or cold drink. And is very popular here in southern Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Chile. Also, we need to understand that this forest is more than just the direct resources that it provides to humans and fauna or wildlife, but it also because of the Araucaria tree unique candelabra shape. So this very big 40 meters high tree that has this unique shape, it really defines the landscape and it gives people a sense of identity. So people, when they come here, they immediately identify the forest and this tree species as something that is unique and only found here. So I think it's a very unique biodiversity in the world here.
You all have touched a little bit on how the forest provides some food and other resources for the communities. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the forest is managed specifically, like how, whether there is management that happens in the forest and how that benefits the community. Jen, did you want to start?
I think the main type of management that has happened in forests in the Northwest Territories in the last several decades would be attempts to suppress fire in the landscape. So, Canada has a pretty strong history of fire suppression in its forests, and this alters the way the forest functions. And so there was a period of fire suppression. The government has now moved toward the practice of, a let it burn policy, unless there is, unless the fires are approaching places of value on the land or threatening people. So there still is some fire suppression activity, and that would be kind of, I think, probably the main management. There's a small amount of forest management that's very localized. Folks use the forest for gathering firewood and that sort of thing, but the management of the forest is fairly limited.
Okay. Andrea, I think the situation here in southern Brazil is quite different. Can you describe a little bit about how forests are managed here?
Yes. Forest management in Brazil is a complicated topic, but we need to understand that we have had two phases in forest management in the country. Basically, in the 19th and 20th century, we have settlers arriving in the region and found an area completely covered by forest, and it was seen as a terrain for settlement. So people need to open the land to start agriculture and live from the land. So there was this phase of deforestation that was increased because of the plentiful quantity of forest wood products. So at the time, in basically the 19th century, some companies from different parts of the world, especially the United States, they came here, start sending those wood, because they were very desirable wood products, they start exporting, and it became one of the main exporting products of Brazil. So there was this combination of settlers trying to open areas to live, to conduct agriculture, and then a lot of interest in exporting those products. So this process led to a vast deforestation process in the country. That led to, more recently, the enactment of very restricted environmental laws that are aimed to protect the remaining forest fragments. So what currently happens is that mostly forest management is forbidden by law to a point in which a farmer can only cut a single tree if they have direct authorization from the environmental agencies. So as we can see, forest management is basically non-existent in terms of more direct use of the forest or wood products. So what happens now, people can collect firewood, fruits, leaves, but what is called low impact, which is a very broad concept. That's why the yerba mate product, it's becoming so even more popular because it's a native tree that grows naturally in the forest. So people are focusing on this product that can be conducted in the forest without much problems, or mostly without problems with the environmental agencies.
Thanks, Andre. And so, Zach, can you tell us a little bit about how forests are managed in Kenya? You had pointed out that there's been a movement towards eucalyptus farming or plantations. But do people still manage the native forest ecosystem other than to extract food and for the bees?
In our forest, there are a number of interest groups. Like, for example, you are not allowed by the government to cut trees without having a permit from the government, even if they are trees that you planted yourself. When you want to use them for timber or for anything, you have to get a permit from the government. And you find that in these forests, you will also have wildlife. For example, we have monkeys in this forest, although back in 20, 30 years ago, there were no monkeys here. And the people believe that these monkeys were brought in by the Kenya Wildlife Services. They would drop monkeys, male and female, in certain ecosystems. So these monkeys have kind of colonized the forest. And you find that with their increase, the increase in biodiversity of birds, for example, bird species is going down. We used to have a lot of guinea fowls, and we believe that the monkeys are eating the eggs of the guinea fowls. And so we don't have any more wild guinea fowls in this forest. But the government still maintains you cannot kill animals without involving the Kenya Wildlife Services. So if you have wildlife human conflicts, then you have to involve the wildlife services to come and sort it out. So occasionally when the monkeys are destroying crops around the area, wildlife services officers come and shoot them and they disappear for a while and they come back. So the management is kind of not very clear-cut because we have landowners who also have to protect their land and prevent people from coming in and using it as much as they want. But for wood, if somebody is collecting firewood, dry wood without cutting, then sometimes they're allowed by the landowners to get into the forest and pick them. But for wildlife, wildlife services would control trees, the fauna, tree species. We have the forest department that is controlling also that. So this is the way the forests are managed around.
Thanks, Zach. That's really interesting that there's this similarity between how people can use the forest resources in terms of timber between Kenya and Brazil, because it's quite restricted here, as Andre said, in Brazil. And it's interesting that there's similar mechanisms to control how forests are used.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Voicing Change. In our next episode, our forest researchers will discuss some of the major threats faced by forest regions, from climate change and wildfire to deforestation. But we'll also hear about how the people affected by these threats are resisting to try and protect these vital ecosystems. Editing and sound design for this episode is by Narayan Subramaniam. Our music is composed by Ali Razmi. Voicing Change is produced with support from the Laurier Centre for Sustainable Food Systems, Wilfrid Laurier University, the Centre for International Governance Innovation, and the Baltzer School of International Affairs.